One of the most pressing questions haunting India's strategic community today is this: what did Operation Sindoor achieve? In the cacophony of the claims and counterclaims about battlefield military losses, most commentators seem to have missed the real gain from Operation Sindoor. As I have been arguing, the real win is the new doctrine India has today. I will come to that soon. The argument that Operation Sindoor was a failure is outright ahistorical because the outcome of the May 2025 operation must be judged based on historical evidence. In other words, to understand and appreciate what the operation means, we must go back into history, a little over quarter a century to be precise. Terrorism has been the most debilitating and consequential national security threat that has plagued post-independent India like nothing else has. Today, I will revisit that history for you. Talk about India's slow but steady doctrinal evolution to deal with terrorism, and tell you what I think Operation Sindoor achieved within that broader historical context. So our story begins in the 1990s, a decade drenched in blood. From Kashmir to Delhi through Punjab, it was a decade of helplessness. Terror attacks were regular, routine, and like normal, shattering lives, rupturing the social fabric, and testing the patience of the Indian state. So what was Delhi's response? Fragmented and incoherent. Intelligence failures frequent, political will absent, and confused. Despite clear signs of Pakistan's involvement, India refused to retaliate even after successfully expelling infiltrators from Kargil in 1999. Why? Because the rules had changed. India and Pakistan had both gone nuclear. And with nuclear weapons came caution and nuclear blackmail and the international pressure on India to stand down no matter what. Clearly, no one wanted to go up like Hiroshima and Nagasaki did. So India restrained, not because it was a strategy, it was hesitation born of risk aversion and global pressure. And let's say the absence of a doctrine. A mindset of hesitation had set in, so deeply entrenched that it almost looked like a well thought out strategy, except it wasn't. This was New Delhi's dilemma. How do you respond to a neighbor that aids terror and hides behind the nuclear bomb? Delhi had no answer, no doctrine. It was stuck.
Today, at 15:45 hours, India conducted 3 underground nuclear tests in the Pokhran range.
May 1998, the ground shook in Pokhran 5 times, one after another. India had just become a nuclear weapon power. A few weeks later, Pakistan answered with its own nuclear test in Chagai. The world watched nervously. South Asia had entered the nuclear age. For some, this was deterrence at last. Mutual fear of destruction would keep war at bay. But that assumption proved too optimistic. Nuclear weapons didn't end violence. They redirected it. The result? A surge in subconventional warfare, terror attacks, infiltration, proxy battles, etc. War was now unthinkable thanks to nuclear weapons. But terrorism? Plausibly deniable and brutally effective. From the Kargil heights to Kaluchak in Jammu, India's northern front became a laboratory of low-intensity conflict. Shielded by nuclear weapons, Pakistan could provoke India without fear and full-scale retaliation. And so, a dangerous paradox emerged. Nuclear weapons deterred war, but enabled terror. They acted as both firewall and enabler. And the international community was quick to condemn the first sniff of Indian conventional reaction and much less Pakistan-sponsored terrorism against India. What theorists call stability-instability paradox was at play. It almost seemed like nukes tied Delhi's hands behind its back. Delhi recognized the dilemma. but couldn't create an effective response. Each attack produced outrage but no retaliation. The state's instinct was still restrained. The search for a doctrine was still on. By the early 2000s, India had started searching for kinetic options. The nuclear test of 1998 had hardened the line of control, but not plugged the flow of terror. Delhi desperately needed a response, below the threshold of a major war, but above the usual hesitation. Enter Operation Kabaddi. Planned in 2001 by Indian Army's Northern Command, it was to be India's first major covert cross-LOC operation, an audacious plan to seize 25 to 30 Pakistani army posts in a surprise move. The goal? Punish Pakistan for its proxy war in Jammu and Kashmir. Capture tactically important ground across the line of control to improve counter-insurgency posture. Send a message to Pindi. Aiding and abetting infiltration comes with costs. This wasn't a wild gamble. The previous year, small-scale cross-LOC raids had succeeded, quietly sanctioned by the higher command in Delhi. Indian Army was still all set to go in. They waited for orders from Delhi. Orders never came, but instead came September 11, 2001. 9/11 reshaped global geopolitics overnight. Literally, the US needed Pakistan as a frontline state in the war on terror. Indian cross-border plans were shelved. Kabaddi was quietly called off, as if it was never planned. Then came a second blow. December 13, 2001. The Indian Parliament was attacked. In response to the Parliament attack, India launched Operation Parakram, one of the largest military mobilizations since 1971. Hundreds of thousands of troops moved to the border. The standoff lasted several months. Hundreds of soldiers died without even fighting the war. Parakram exposed a painful truth. India had the forces, but no doctrine for swift, proportionate retaliation against terror. From the ashes of Kabaddi and the pain of the Parliament attack emerged the Cold Start Doctrine, a plan for rapid conventional offensives calibrated to avoid crossing Pakistan's nuclear threshold. The aim? Limited land grabs to gain tactical leverage. But Pakistan responded by recalibrating its own posture, adopting full spectrum deterrence and filling perceived gaps in its deterrence architecture with tactical nuclear weapons across air, land, and sea platforms, aiming to deny India any conventional advantage and deter future offensives. The rules had changed again. As I said earlier, terrorism had a nuclear shield and a strategy to go with it. Delhi desperately needed a response to that, but it didn't have one yet. November 26, 2008. 10 Pakistani terrorists arrive by sea and unleash horror across Mumbai. 3 days. Taj, CST, Nariman House, 166 people killed, over 300 injured. The country was devastated. One terrorist, Ajmal Kasab, is captured alive. His testimony and intercepted calls left no doubt. The attackers were trained and directed by Lashkar-e-Taiba, operating under the eye of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence. The control room, Karachi. The handlers, traced back to the Pakistani state. India had every reason to retaliate. A lot of people argued, but it didn't. No airstrikes, no cold start, no military preparations. Instead, India chose to isolate Pakistan diplomatically. Dossiers, UN resolutions, public appeals, etc., etc. Some elite leaders were sanctioned by the United Nations. A few were arrested in Pakistan. A few, perhaps, were bumped off. But justice remained largely symbolic, at least in the eye of the public. Those responsible still walked free. Some enjoyed freedom even from within jail cells. But why was there no retaliation? Because by 2008, Political India had internalized the nuclear ceiling. The 1998 tests had cast a long shadow, which still continued. The world's primary concern was to prevent war between two nuclear states, not help India find an answer to terrorism. The Indian state, devastated, started to act in different ways. The National Investigation Agency was born, laws were tightened, institutions were built, but militarily, the doctrine remained frozen. Domestic response to an external threat was clearly insufficient. Through the 2010s, terror attacks continued, especially in Jammu and Kashmir. Delhi continued to stay on the defensive. This was the belief in Delhi. Moral high ground and international pressure on Pakistan would deter the next strike, except they didn't. Because good intentions don't produce deterrence in real life. Deterrence comes from the fear of consequences and credible threats. Delhi was looking for a response, a doctrine, but it was simply not finding it. September 18, 2016, 4 suicide attackers stormed an army camp in Uri, close to the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. 19 Indian soldiers are killed. Investigators trace the attack to Jaish-e-Mohammed, backed once again from across the border. India is at a familiar crossroads now. But this time, something shifts. 10 days after the Uri attack, Indian Special Forces cross the LOC and strike multiple terror launch pads in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Precise, limited, declared. These were the first publicly declared surgical strikes. The operation itself was not new, but the acknowledgement and the political intent were new. There was a message. Proxy war is no longer cost-free. Pakistan denied the strikes ever happened. That denial gave both sides a way out. It limited domestic pressure on Pakistan to respond, but importantly, there was no escalation between the two sides. This was an attempt in deterrence by punishment, but tailored and under the nuclear threshold. India had taken its first real kinetic step forward, small but important. India also moved diplomatically, isolating Pakistan in the region. But results were mixed. Islamabad deepened ties with China, Russia, and Iran, hedging against Indian pressure. Still, the 2016 strikes certainly mattered. They redefined India's engagement with Pakistan. Military response was now on the table, not just rhetoric. India had tested the waters, and the waters hadn't boiled over. Something was changing. A doctrinal shift was starting to take place. February 14, 2019, a suicide bomber from Jaish-e-Mohammed rammed an explosive-laden car into a CRPF convoy in Pulwama, Jammu and Kashmir. 40 Indian soldiers were killed. And this time, India responded with a different playbook altogether. On February 26, 2019, the Indian Air Force carried out standoff strikes across the international border and hit targets in Balakot, in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan. The target was the largest Jaish-e-Mohammed training camp. It was a doctrinal leap. In 2016, after the Uri attack, India had conducted ground-based surgical strikes targeting terror launch pads just across the LOC using Army Special Forces. The message was tactical. We will hit back quietly and precisely. But the geography was limited. The tools conventional and constrained. 2019 had changed that completely. Air power was used to strike targets well within Pakistan, not just in POK, but across the international border. It wasn't just about launch pads. It was about hitting the infrastructure of terrorism itself in some ways. That was not an operation in the dark of the night. It was a bold public message. India would escalate vertically to acts of terrorism. Terrorism would be met not with condemnation, but with force, reach and resolve. In response, Pakistan scrambled its own fighter jets. An IAF MiG-21 was downed. Pakistan suffered losses too. IAF Wing Commander Abhinandan was captured and returned immediately under intense global scrutiny. But Balakot strikes shattered a psychological ceiling deeply etched in the Indian strategic culture. They proved India was willing to cross thresholds, military, geographic, and doctrinal. There was a new normal today. April 2025, armed terrorists strike Kashmir's Pahalgam, killing 26 civilians, the deadliest assault on Indian soil since the 2008 Mumbai attacks. The TRF, a proxy of the banned Lashkar-e-Taiba, claims responsibility. But this time, India does not wait. Operation Sindoor is launched. The retaliation is swift, calibrated, and for the first time, Pakistan's nuclear bluff is not invoked. It's cold. Islamabad responds conventionally. No threats of tactical nuclear weapons. The two militaries strictly fight in the conventional space. Delhi's message was unmissable. If conflict is initiated through subconventional means such as terrorism, proxies, or asymmetric violence, India's response will be conventional. The strategic burden India now asserts lies with Pakistan. Pakistan tolerates or supports subconventional attacks, India will retaliate openly and forcefully. This is no longer deterrence by punishment, it is deterrence by extortion, as I have written in an article for India's World. Delhi's aim is to create an adverse incentive structure for Pakistan, where each escalation raises the cost, stakes, and intensity for Pakistan, to the point where subconventional strategies become unsustainable. This strategy emerged gradually over time. In 2016, the Indian Army struck only launch pads in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. In 2019, the IAF targeted terror training camps deep inside Pakistan. In 2025, the doctrine expands, striking not just camps, but also the infrastructure, support nodes, and logistics pipelines, all while carefully avoiding civilian and command targets in early phases. And yet, as the crisis escalated, India's targeting matrix widened, reflecting growing resolve and a rejection of the old boundaries between terrorism and war. India's new counter-terrorism doctrine is structured, integrated, and unapologetic. It prioritizes action over argument, resolve over restraint, and signaling over silence. The new doctrine is in place today. But that challenge for Delhi is not over. Delhi needs to do more to materially back up the new doctrine. That remains to be our challenge.